Now, Australia is a fairly small place. We have slightly more, just slightly, slightly more people than Southern California. So we're about 22.8 million people, and Southern California, according to the Wikipedia just now, is 22.4. So in a way, I'm hoping to underwhelm you with the size of the analyses that I'm doing, because we simply haven't got the population to do some of the tests that I'd like to see here. So one of our colleagues earlier was talking about having 30,000 unique visitors for a test. It's like, yes, I'd love that, please. In order to understand this talk, it probably helps to know a little bit about my background. I originally started my career as a fitter and turner, a metal worker, someone that makes machine parts. And I found that it's very useful because I had this urge to pull things apart and to understand how they work. I later on did a visual arts degree in sculpture, and that I think gave me the kind of inquisitive mindset to understand why we do what we do and what is human behavior and how can I communicate that in an alternative form, in this case a three-dimensional form. And lastly, I did a business degree to kind of pull it all together, but mostly to give me the confidence to talk to the C-suite. I think if anything that degree gave me, it was maybe some little tips on accounting and human resources, but really it was just to have a tick against my name that gave me that confidence to stand up in front of people, having a degree in sculpture and actually talk their talk. So today is a talk about statistics. I'd like to call it, maybe to revise the title, is The Case of the Missing Ring and Other Mystery Stories, because what I want to look at today is how we can use data to understand why things happen. The ring in question is from my partner's website. It's not her ring, it's an artist by the name of Stephanie Winther, and it is from a contemporary jewellery site. Now Alice, my partner, is the owner of that site and also a jeweller in her own right, and she's quite well known in Australia. She's got work in the National Gallery. And so it's a very small story, so don't be impressed by the numbers, but I would ask you to think about the methodology that I'm using. I'll then go on to talk about some of the other recent analyses that I've done and just give you some tips on how I've used statistics to do that. So I'm going to start off, and the name of this ring was This Too Shall Pass Ring. And this is, as it turned out, we couldn't explain it. This was a result of a chance occurrence where we suddenly ranked on #1 for Google for this phrase, and it had us puzzled. And so I had to go back and do a bit of research on this, and we end up with a bit of a story which I wasn't aware. Maybe you are, perhaps others are, but I certainly wasn't. Now, the earliest part of the story I could find was a reference to a Persian philosopher, the Atara Nishpahur. I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation. Now, the good thing about this is, these sorts of slides, I mean, you can say, okay, he's well-rounded, he's got a nice education, he knows about all this stuff. Well, the truth is, it's actually Wikipedia is fantastic for finding out these sorts of facts. There's also King Solomon's parable with the Bible, where it looked like where King Solomon asked one of his executive staff to go off and find him a supposedly non-existent ring, which had the powers. If a happy man looked at it, he became sad, and if a sad man looked at it, he became happy. That ring did not supposedly exist until this guy found in a market somewhere a person that he asked that question, is there such a ring? And he took a gold ring and carved into it 4 Hebrew letters that was, when transcribed, and I won't even attempt to pronounce them because my pronunciation would be dreadful, but it transcribed as, "This too shall pass." And lastly, even a famous one of your countrymen raised this topic in a talk during the address to the Wisconsin State Agricultural Society about this particular phrase. Now, why have I focused on this? Well, part of this is the underlying nature of what this phrase is meant to represent, which is about things that happen to us. And I suppose passing through that for good and for ill. So this too shall pass. If I'm encountering a lot of pain, or I'm in a financial hardship position or something like that, it shall pass. But equally, conversely, if I'm having a great deal of success, it's also equally likely that this shall pass. And so I found this was kind of a nice story from which to build this talk, because when we look at statistics, we've got to look at whether this is a long-lasting effect, the causal effect as we were just talking about with Scott Nicholson's talk, the effect that makes the difference. Because ultimately we are dealing in a random world where things happen. And often we have, as analysts, the role of trying to explain why did that occur. Now, some of the examples we've seen so far today where we have landing pages that have been well optimized and produced a great outcome, we have a fairly clear and single goal: to sell more bookings of camper vans, to sell more accommodation. And in those scenarios, landing page testing works very well. But what about a university course? How does one sell a university course? What sort of testing can we do to find out what the magical formula is to encourage a student to make a decision of one university over another? That is one example amongst many where a website will attract many, many different people to it for many, many different purposes. And how do we optimize that experience? So just in putting this slide together, randomness and chance are two of my favorite topics in the world, and I've done much reading around them, and I very much enjoy working through them, which has led me to statistics and probability. Now, I won't claim to be a statistician here. I'm sure there'll be many of you out there that will know far more than me, and I encourage you, if you do want to arm wrestle about methodologies, I will be available in the bar, and I do tend to like a single malt scotch. So perhaps we can talk then. So these are just some random words I picked up to give my impressions of what it is in web analytics that we're attempting to do. You know, we're looking at risk, trying to minimize risk by controlling it. We're trying to minimize chance by planning. But ultimately, the world works against us. There are many things that we need to get through to make good decisions based on the data that we have at hand. Now, to me, it's all about confidence. And this is going to be a word I'll use in two meanings. So this slide really is about confidence in us being able to tackle challenges. This is an image from the New Zealand Navy I found on Flickr last night, and I thought a wonderful one about somebody attempting to climb these mammoth walls with the help of their peer group to help them up and get them lifted. And I see web analytics as a little bit like that. But really, it's all about confidence. And that's one of the concepts I want to talk about today. Now, just so I can get a show, I mean, these lights are kind of really blinding me here, but just to get a quick show, who here has some form of formal statistical background or understands what this means at least? Good. So it's hard to picture talk in these scenarios because, I mean, I know half the audience are going to be like these people who just raised their hands, which is great, and the other half are going to say, what on earth is he talking about? That looks hard. Well, there's one great rule of life, I think, that's it's best to work by when you look at numbers, and that's plus or minus two standard deviations. So if I see any number, is that number existing with one or two standard deviations of the true mean? And that's ultimately what we're trying to answer when we see things like, what is the average bounce rate? I get asked that question all the time. Okay, I see my bounce rate's at 50%. What's the average bounce rate? Because my standard answer is, well, that's completely irrelevant. Why are you asking me the question? Well, in a much nicer terms, of course. It's all about how do you use that information to make a decision. Because bounce, as we know, I'm sure if we think about this long enough, is contextual. It's all about the context of how did somebody come to your website. So what's the bounce rate for the population of people that have come to us to find our contact details? Well, I would like that to be 100%. What's the bounce rate for somebody coming to us to research a product? I want that to be 0%. And there's many spectrums in between. Now the thing is, the tools that we're given act against us. Now coming back to my trade, one of the things that I feel that I've really gained in my thinking through that and learning through that process is that you don't have one tool to solve a problem. You have many tools. And when the only tool in your toolkit is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if we look at this with just a single web analytics viewpoint, we may find that we have a very limited view of what the data means and what it's telling us. So this back to the definite style story. This is the contemporary jewelry site. It's a small site. I won't say it's spectacular in its numbers, but it does serve to illustrate some of the analytical concepts that we work with. So we found that we ranked very well for the term, "this too shall pass" ring. And we suddenly got a spike of orders. And we thought, okay, hang on, this is great. We'll kind of ride this wave. But things went awry. So whilst we had a great start in the part of 2010 there, we ended up with a fairly significant decline overall on the website. This is the total number of visits over a period of 2 years. So it was just trending down. It's like, well, what on earth is going on? How can we explain this? Now, I've had companies large and small who have sites that they don't put a lot of attention into, and sales go up and sales go down, and the question becomes, why? We didn't do anything, so why did sales go up and why did sales go down? Well, I mean, we can find some answers to it, but we certainly can't find all of them. Today's a little bit about one answer to that particular question. Now, if I pull the numbers into Google Analytics and look at it a little deeper, organic search traffic constitutes the bulk of traffic to this particular website. And if we look at the point in time where that change occurred, we see that there's a 28% drop in visits between the October to December period and the January to March period. So this warrants explanation. So whilst I have a trending curve down, we actually had a fairly steep drop around about that period of time. Now, as we know that that was organic traffic, and I don't expect you to read this slide, that's, by the way, so Jim, don't ban me from a future conference, please, that this, all I want you to take note of is red and green. And this is a very typical analytical problem that I have to solve. I have here thousands, if not tens of thousands, of separate keywords on a site that's been optimized for the long tail. So there's huge numbers of variations of very specific keywords that contribute to the traffic of this site. And that's the same with many of my clients. So how do I know which of these are the keywords that have contributed to that drop? Because I'd have to find every single permutation of long-tailed keywords and examine them in combination. And there's thousands of them. It may not be scalable to do so. So just to run through the numbers quickly. So contemporary jewelry in this particular window went from 98 keywords to 98 visits to 94 visits. Well, that's a small drop, doesn't explain the 28% drop. We gained some from contemporary jewelry designers. We gained some from the brand name. We lost some from Lola Greeno's work. And by the way, if you want to see some magnificent shell jewelry from an Indigenous Aboriginal artist in Australia, look up Lola Greeno. Her stuff is absolutely spectacular. Again, the list goes on and on and on. So how do I turn this into something, okay, what do I do? What is the action that I need to take? Well, my first port of call is the Google Webmaster tools. Now this, I think, is going to become more and more important. And again, I would imagine that most of you have had some experience, but are there people that are not using Google Webmaster tools at the moment? Few. I sincerely encourage you to get this integrated. If you don't have this data already, it is going to become more and more important as time goes by, because Google now hide our search results, hide our search queries, more correctly, hide our search queries when we're logged in. So in Google Analytics, Omniture, Web Trends, and the rest of them, you will now see this term "not provided" appearing in the results and the data. Now, Google have done this to protect users' privacy, because once they're logged in, they can tell who that person is, and they're chopping off the keyword, sending the user over to your website, but they're just simply saying, rather than telling you that I typed in contemporary jewelry, I'm now going to tell you you don't just not provided that keyword. So what do we do about that? Well, Google Webmaster Tools has the data of what they searched for and what they clicked. We have the data of what landing page we received them into the site, but we don't have a key that joins those two together. And so Google Webmaster Tools is the only way that we will see the data that the users have typed into Google in its purest form. In Google Analytics, I'm not sure the rest, we'll see this kind of hybridized, dumbed down version, and that will increase over time. Some of my colleagues in the US here have reported that that's as high as 20 to 25% and higher in terms of the number of keywords that they've lost. So we look there and we see that we had a drop in the number of impressions for this too shall pass. And by the way, Google Webmaster Tools gives the impressions of the keywords, so we actually can get our click-through rates from this tool, which is a very valuable resource when doing search engine optimization, because it's not only getting the ranking, but it's also about encouraging people to click on the link in the search engine, and to which we have minimal tools that we can control. The keyword, the title being in the keyword, and the title being in the meta description. If we play with those variables, particularly the meta description, we can encourage people to click on the link and hence increase our click-through rate in optimizing for search engines. So we can see that this too shall pass was the keyword that dropped. And if I look at where the search query is landed, and I'll blow this up a little bit, you can also see that the minus 17% is the page that the people were going to from that particular keyword also dropping over time. So the impressions dropping as well as the clicks. This has given me a bit of an insight as to, okay, here is where the problem may lay, because I can see that's one of the biggest magnitudes of drop that I've had in the period that I'm analysing. Equally, contemporary jewellery, we also rank #1 for, at least in Australia. I mean, I'm not sure if we do here, but we use both variations of the spelling, so we may still do in the US. Now, the thing that I can see here is that over the long term, this keyword is dropping away. So people are using it less and less frequently than when we started putting the site out there back in the mid-2000s. And if I look at the search frequency in Google Insights for search for "this too shall pass," I can see a massive spike in early 2010, which correlates perfectly with when our sales started to come through. Now, I haven't tracked it down for today, but I do believe there was a novel published around about that time that was popular that mentioned the character having a ring with "this too shall pass" inscribed. And I think that would be the reason for that spike, though I don't have evidence to say that. Now, if I blow that up, we can see that there was a very big spike, and it looks like it plateaus out until, of course, we blow it up a little larger. And in which case I can see that it is actually more of a decline over that period of time, albeit on a slow slope. So that we've got a decreasing number of people searching for this keyword, and I think that is likely to be one of the causes of our drop in traffic. So I pull this data out into Excel, and this is where I suppose I come in as an analyst and say, look, I've got these lines, this is contemporary jewellery, and I'm comparing that to the total visits to the site, which is the red line at the top, and the organic search visits on the green line above that. Now I can look at those two graphs visually and say, yes, it does look like there is a rough correlation, but I can go better than that. I can use a very simple statistical method to calculate the correlation coefficient. Now this was done in a tool called R. I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with that, but it's a free tool. It is a little daunting in that it is a command line tool, so you've got to get used to typing in text and loading in text files and stuff like that. So SPSS, I even believe the Excel statistics plugins will do similar. You can get these sorts of numbers from a graphical tool as well. So this has given me a correlation of about 0.44. It's a weak correlation. It's not something I'm going to go get too excited about. It's not telling me that there is a great correlation between the people typing in that search keyword and those clicking through to our site as a whole. But if I run the same correlation for just our organic traffic, I'm getting a better indication that there may be some impact here by this particular drop in keywords. So this is for contemporary jewellery. If I do the same again for "this too shall pass," I can see that the correlation is actually higher for the total traffic of 66% almost. And when I run it again for just the organic traffic, I'm getting almost 72%. So I'm getting this as a much stronger signal that this is the causal factor. Now, because I haven't run an experiment here, I don't have the opportunity to, because I don't control what people do and I can't control what they do in Google, I won't actually ever know whether this is the causal factor, but I'm getting closer to my understanding of things that I may test by doing this sort of analysis in a methodical way. So I will say that this is a good indicator, given that I've got over 70% correlation from the two signals. So it's a way that we can start to understand the data in a way other than visually. And it also gives us context to some of the numbers that the tools will provide for us. So why is this important? Well, correlation is pretty much the only way that we're going to be able to measure how people move between devices, websites, platforms, social media, etc. Because we don't have a common key, and it's unlikely we ever will. I mean, we discussed the Target case study in the New York Times and how people got really spooked out. It is unlikely that it's going to be acceptable to the general public that we have one unique identifier that follows us around and joins the dots between all our activities. So when I take that iPad and I browse on that, and I share that with my daughter and my family, that they also browse on that. And then I come into the website with my iPhone on the bus in the morning, and then maybe I go onto my laptop at work and do some further research there, and maybe I use G+ on all those and Twitter, etc. I'm not going to be able to join the dots between all those. And all I have really are correlations and strengths and weaknesses in those correlations. I can, however, start to run experiments to determine whether there is a causal factor in this. So if I tweet a certain way for a period of time to observe the changes that happen on our website, and then we stop tweeting, and maybe I can do some sort of testing there. I was quite heartened to hear Scott Nicholson talking about the econometric approach, and that really kind of got my fancy, so I'm definitely going to be exploring that further. Just a bit of a point of aside, I mean, it might be fairly obvious that Facebook's not appearing here, and that's actually quite deliberate, because when I went to Facebook's website, they actually forbid you using their logo. So I thought that was kind of a social media kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because if you're not going to use their logo, how can you mention them? I didn't want to put a like button on it because it didn't make any sense in this context. So as I don't know where this presentation is going, I thought I'd best err on the side of caution. Okay, so here's another one. That's a small story. This is a real story. This is a fairly big Australian organisation, so I've got to be a little bit more careful with the data here. The client rang me up and they said, okay, we think we've got a problem. We've got a page that has an average of 14 seconds on the site load indicator in Google Analytics. Now, for those of you that don't know, and I only didn't know this either till a couple of days ago, Google Analytics now tracks the page load time by default in Google Analytics. You don't need to add it into your tagging. And it does so for apparently about 0.5% of the population, I think, of the people visiting your site. They say 1% is the default, but the numbers don't seem to correlate to that. So anyway, this client rings me up and they say, okay, well, we're a bit worried that we've got this tremendously high load time on our homepage. What do we do? Is it a problem? Because it runs really fast for me and I can't tell. So we take on the case and we start to investigate that. So the first thing I want to look at is how an average is broken out. And this is where I get on my hobby horse, because simple averages lie, and they lie big time. Now, I would really encourage our vendors, if any of them are here, to take averages and break them down for us, because as an analyst, if I see an average, I want to know what that average breaking down to. I want to know the distribution. And distributions like this are possible in some tools, but in a lot of the tools, they don't exist. So if I want to see the breakdown of bounce rate, for instance, bounce rate's a bad example, pages per visit over a particular dimension, say a keyword, it's very difficult to get that breakdown. I may be able to massage the data using segmentation in Google Analytics, but really in most tools I can't get it. So what's this telling me? Well, it's telling me firstly, the sample size is incredibly small. 286 pages out of 48,000 page views. And it's telling me even more that there's 12 page loads that were above 60 seconds. The good news is the majority are under this 3 seconds, but even 3 seconds sounds really high, so it's kind of got my scratching my head. So we drill down a little bit further and I look at the page download. So this is the page for the actual page itself, just that one HTML file. Very, very fast, under a half a second in 99.8 or something percent, 99.5% of the times that's loaded. So I know it's not the server speed. But when I look at the redirection, I've gone through all of these and after checking them all out, it's actually the redirection speed that is the problem child. And then the penny drops. I'd read somewhere, Firefox. Firefox is the problem because there's a little note, an errata in the Google Analytics help file that says, oh, by the way, we have a problem with the Firefox plugin that causes this to happen. And that's when the penny drops. So I break down the numbers. Well, sorry, that's a bigger view of the previous slide. So I break down the numbers as to Firefox and not Firefox. And there we see it. The Firefox browsers, very much biased towards the high end. So 30 plus seconds in this group is a Firefox browser plugin not behaving well. And of course, the good news, I can pass that back to the client, is that it isn't only the Firefox browsers and it's an error. So please ignore it and move on. And I think that this is one of the it illustrated to me quite clearly of the danger that these tools can provide unless we have the capacity to pull these numbers apart and look at what they mean and understand them. And also to have the the background information to really investigate this. This was a hard one. This had one of my lead analysts, Flummox, just going to say, well, what do I do? How do I get this? And I said, okay, let's sit down, we'll chill, we'll go through it methodically and we'll work it out. It took us about 20 minutes to work through that process and report back to the client, all for one number that had them shocked. Now that's an unnecessary analysis, but one that does illustrate the problems that we have with averages. Of course, we're putting our toe in the water with this now. So we have tools like Google Website Optimizer that enable us to do experimental design so we can actually test things. But we're testing landing pages, and as a few of the speakers have talked about, we're testing things like colors and buttons and so forth. It's quite heartwarming to see people talking about testing price elasticity on websites, because that's always been a thing I thought would be wonderful to do, because we have a perfect environment to test how people push back on price. But the troubles we have getting people to implement even simple tests to get them to implement something like a price elasticity test using what would potentially have to be modifications to their entire checkout system have scared most of my clients away from that particular approach. So it's very interesting, experimental design. Unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of people running away with this concept that are somewhat less informed than they need to be. So the design decisions they're making are driving this, not the hypothesis of what might be wrong with the website or what opportunities they may have for improvement. So here's a test that we helped an agency run. We didn't design this test, but we did help them through a number of parts of the process. And we did this analysis in Excel. And it was the data was gathered using Web Analytics. So we didn't actually have to use the Web Analytics, so the Web Trends Optimized product. And I noticed one of our fellow members of the audience previously had said this morning that they used Omniture Site Catalyst to collect the data. You can do that. There's nothing preventing you from running these sorts of tests using data that you've got with the tools you've got. You don't necessarily need, Website Optimizer or so forth, but you do need a statistical ability to analyze the data. And that's what those tools are giving. It's a nice graphical interface and a system that does it, but the numbers are pretty easy to calculate if you know what to do. So who's heard or who knows of the relationship between confidence intervals and confidence levels? Let's just quickly have a show of hands on that kind of concept. 1, 2. So this is where the rubber hits the road, and this is the bit that I'd hope to get you to take away. They're intrinsically interwoven. So what I'm saying here is that if I'm going to be 95% confident, these are the ranges for this test and how they fall. And to interpret a chart like this, I need to have one of those bars being clearly and distinctively above the others. And so this is a 25 variation test, and as I said, Australia is a small place, so to get a number of impressions for tests like this is hard. The test threshold in this case was quite low. It was really to get people to enter a postcode and click on a button. So we took the 25 variations and we analysed it that way, but then that didn't give us any clear results. We can see that there's a leader there about, I think it's version 4A, and that's kind of moving ahead of the pack, but it's not conclusive for 25 variables. However, when I trim it down to one variable, we can see that version 4 of the layout is just ahead. Probably enough for me to bank money on it. Not as much as I'd like. But why I know that is because the confidence interval, so it's going at a conversion rate of between, just reading this, I don't come remember the numbers off the top of my head, but about 32.5% to 34, just over 34%. So I am 95% sure if I was to repeat this test again, that I would get a result between 31.5 or 32.5 and about 34.1%. But however, I've got a 1 in 20 chance of getting it wrong. And that's probably more important because it's not that I've got 95% chance of getting it right. I've got a 1 in 20 chance of getting it wrong. And I would then get an average that existed outside of that confidence interval. Understanding confidence intervals and confidence levels, I think, is key for any decent analyst in this industry. And I really think that statistically, we need to be far more literate on these numbers because these are not hard, abstract, deep statistical concepts. They are about chance and probability and the basics of how do we do our job. And just to kind of close with that one, we can see here that the confidence intervals for the messaging on this, definitely not very clear at all. One slightly weaker one maybe slightly stronger one, but definitely nothing clear. And if I ran this test for the next 10 years or whatever it might take to get a clear winner, it would probably come out with the version that's second from the bottom, but I couldn't guarantee it. It's quite likely that's just due to chance, and there is actually no discerning features, no discerning difference between them. So just in closing, I think complexity is a wonderful thing. I think that when we try and do what we do in our jobs as analysts, we really need to embrace complexity and look for not the simple answers, and to validate our data, to look how we can look deeper below this and to kind of understand why is it that people do what we want, to try and find the narratives and stories within that data that kind of help to illustrate points and help us to take a position on things at which we can test and then try and look for, I suppose, a more meaningful answer that we can communicate to others. And I thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. Thank you.